He's John Timpane.
And he's Don Rooney.
And this is
The Musical Innertube.
Now, you may ask, why is this podcast called The Musical Innertube?
And we may reply, because that's its name, of course.
Now, how did this podcast get that name?
Back in college, we hosted a radio show. Once, we tried to introduce a soothing musical interlude.
Instead, we messed up and wound up introducing a soothing musical innertube, and the name stuck.
So here we are, hundreds of years later, still talking
to interesting people about their interesting lives.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
So, video games, do they warp your mind? That's a question that every parent has asked since the games hit the market. Dr. Rachel Kowert is a research psychologist, a world-renowned researcher on the uses and effects of digital games, including their impact on physical, social, and psychological well-being. She's an award-winning author. She's published a variety of books and scientific articles relating to the psychology of games, and more recently, the relationship between games and mental health. And you came to the right place with mental health with me and John, because neither of us have any. Rachel, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's get started. I have 3 boys, all of whom grew up on video games. We kind of let them play whatever they wanted, including those lovely Street Fighter games and the other ones. And they're all semi-normal, and none of them is in jail as of now. So I guess that kind of talks to your point that video games are not necessarily the cause of youth running into violence as a way of life.
No, actually, it's been patently disproven that there's any direct links between video game play and aggression or violence. It's the most studied question in the entire field of game studies, as you can imagine why. And it's really, there's no evidence linking the two together. But yet, that idea still remains, as you said. A lot of parents ask me about it, and it still kind of exists in the ether.
But the games themselves are often so violent. And I'm not objecting to the notion that they don't cause violence, but it does suggest, at least to me, sitting in this chair, that the people playing the games know the difference between the gaming world and the non-gaming world. Has that been studied?
Yes, it has. Our brains are actually really good at differentiating between what's real and what's not. And a good example I like to give is watching any Quentin Tarantino movie, right? Imagine how you feel when you watch it. Maybe a little uncomfortable, but imagine how you'd feel if you were there in those scenes as an actual person, right? That's the difference that we're talking about.
And our brains are good at keeping those worlds separate.
Correct.
All right.
Yeah, because there is an actual whole category of games called shooter games. And those are the ones where it's POV and you have a gun and you're killing as many aliens or bad guys as you possibly can. Is this along the lines of when your mother, your psychologist, whatever, says, hey, if you got aggression, buy a punching bag and whack? Is this kind of the equivalent of that?
Yeah, that's definitely one way in which these games are used. The Freudian term is called sublimation, which is where you take a negative impulse and you turn it into something less negative. So that would be getting the punching bag or painting an angry painting or playing video games.
If video games are not causing harm, do they do nice things for us? Are there things that they do? In other words, there's do no harm. It sounds like the video games, at least according to the research, are not making people more violent. And I suppose there's one way in which they don't make you violent. They make you stay at home and sit on the couch, so you're not out there doing violent things.
Yeah, causing trouble.
But that's just half a joke. I suppose I want to go even further and say, are there good things that they do for us? Are there benefits that accrue from playing the games?
Yeah, I want to say that. I don't want to say they do no harm. There's a discussion to be had about people who use games in a problematic way, but that's a more nuanced kind of conversation. It definitely doesn't do broad harm, just to clarify. Does it do good things? Yeah, a lot of things. It can teach us new skills. It can help us reduce our sense of loneliness. It's really good for mood management, which is taking a negative mood to a more positive one. So bored to less bored or angry to happier. It's all kinds of endorphins are released when you play. There's so much research about the positive benefits of play, which is what games are. They're play, and play is important throughout the lifespan. So it's just one way of getting that need met.
As I said, my kids all played video games of various kinds. And of course, as they were younger in the 80s and 90s, the video games got better and better. And they went to RPG games. And I don't think I don't remember them going into shooter games. I remember them liking the RPG or the role-playing games a lot better. And now my oldest son has a daughter. She's 12. And she has a Switch. And on the Switch is one of the Animal Crossing. And that's how he introduced her to video games. And there's a little interactive in that. But again, it's a situation where she can go to him and say, okay, how do I do this? And he's, with all his experience, it's a real father-daughter bonding thing, which, again, happens over video games, which I wouldn't have thought of even 10, 15 years ago.
No, and that's a really lovely story, because a lot of times when I talk to parents and they're concerned about their kids' gameplay, my number one thing I always say is play with them. There's so many kinds of games for all kinds of skill levels or comfort levels. Animal Crossing is a fantastic example. You're basically just decorating a town. Like, there's not real skill involved, just more time. And I love that. I also play Animal Crossing with my 8-year-old, and it was really good over COVID because you don't think about all the benefits that come from, you have to read what the people say to each other. There's math involved. There's a shop, and you have to earn money and spend it, and kind of money management and time management, because time passes in real time. So all of these other things that go along with it that you might not have thought about.
I mean, problem solving, I should think, is something that you encounter in a lot of these games.
Absolutely.
Now, what you were talking about as far as parents not knowing what kids do, now that's kind of where I was when my kids were playing video games. I kind of had an idea of what they were doing, but I didn't have any insight into the actual playing of the games or what was involved. Is that sort of kind of what leads to the I want to say the mystery of the games and parents not trusting them exactly?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big part of it. And when I talk to parents and I say play together, not only because it's fun to do as a family activity, but also because it lends insight into what they're actually playing. Do you want to know what Street Fighter is actually like? A good way to do that is to play it and see what it's like. And there's often a lot of trepidation because parents don't want to be bad at anything. But I'll be honest, the kids like it better when you're not good at it. My daughter loves it when I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
So don't let that hold you back.
I do remember, I'm trying to think, not Street Fighter, but Mortal Kombat.
Was it?
And that was the one that my kids played. And my wife and I sat down and watched them play it once or twice. And it was pretty gruesome. You were tearing people's hearts out, or,
yes.
Everybody had a move, a finishing move, which was deadly and pretty gross, actually. And the idea I got was that it is cartoon violence. And what occurred to me was this is really sort of a version of watching Bugs Bunny or the Wile E. Coyote fall off the cliff, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar, and that's a great way of framing it. My parents were horrified when Mortal Kombat came out and definitely would not let me play it, much to my brother and I's chagrin. We wanted to play it desperately. But yeah, our brains know that it's a cartoon and it's not real, and I'm not going to actually do that to anybody on the street if I walk past them.
Hopefully.
I mean, I don't think I have the skill level, but also I do not have the desire.
Exactly.
It's interesting that you talk about the games as a way to reset your mental state sometimes. Like if you're bored, it can get you to be less bored. If you're in sort of a sad or depressed state of mind, maybe it'll make you happy. Can you tell us more about that? Especially, we know that the teen years are to some extent prone to depression in certain settings. I'm just wondering about video games in that sort of context. Can you tell us more?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which, as I mentioned, games work for mood management. So one is that it is entertaining and fun. So just like sitting and watching a movie or, watching a play or whatever it is you like to do, in that sense, it's going to have a positive psychological impact on you because you are entertained. The thing about games, too, though, is that they're socially connected. So even if you're playing a single player game, let's say on a console, you are still connected on the platform to the chat room for anyone on the platform, to the achievement boards that people share across games. So games are inherently a social activity. And if you're feeling down, social connection and social connectedness is a very good way to feel less down. And also at the end of the day, when we talk about games and their benefits, their psychological benefits, it tends to fall into one of three buckets. It leads to social connectedness, or it fosters social connectedness, fosters a sense of achievement, again, those leaderboards, and it gives players a sense of autonomy. It gives them a sense of freedom. They have a freedom to choose what they're going to play. They have a freedom to explore the vast world of the RPGs if they're into that. And those three buckets, we call it self-determination theory, it underlies all human motivation for all the activities that we do. So games are particularly desirable and particularly adept at checking those boxes for people.
I'm thinking about all the TV shows that I've seen. This has become almost a cliche on television of the nerdy kid who is completely maladjusted. You never see him or her come out of their bedroom. They don't really have any friends except in the virtual world of game playing, where actually some of those friends are not virtual. They're actually people who like you. They just never met you. They're real people. But evidently the research is saying the reverse, that it is socializing, that it leads you to do the things that I think many parents would like their kids to do, which is to meet new people, to have a diversity of friends. I met a 16-year-old once, and we were talking about games, and she told me that one of her favorite friends lived in China. And I said, "Where did you meet this friend?" And she said, "Well, actually, I've never met her, but I know all about her because we play games together all the time, and she sends me messages. It helps her improve her English.
Very good.
She tells, all this stuff." Well, I'm sure she's not the only example of something like that,
Yeah. I mean, research has found, there's several unique things that come with friends in games. One is that it's a global activity, and so you can meet people across the globe, and it's been linked to like expanded worldviews because you're meeting people from different countries with different worldviews. It's kind of like the modern pen pal, almost, is what you're describing. And my parents certainly encouraged pen pal. Yeah.
Oh, I know. And I have a couple of them. I mean, I love pen pals. It strikes me that it's very much the same, that get a letter from them is very special. And so to get a message from them is probably very special too. And it's not as though you don't know that this person lives very far away in very different circumstances, so it's so impressive to know that, well, I suppose there are nerdy kids who are maladjusted and they go into the video game world to get away from the real world, but that doesn't have to do with the video games. That probably has to do with other things.
Yeah. And I mean, that stereotype is actually what motivated my foray into this field of work. I was studying to become a therapist, and it was 2008, and it was height of World of Warcraft panic. Everyone was worried about online games. And I saw multiple groups of parents that were like, "What is this game doing to my child? I feel like it's making them socially maladjusted." And full disclosure, I was playing, a good 20 to 30 hours a week of World of Warcraft. So after the third or fourth parent, I was like, oh God, is something happening here that I need to be worried about? So selfishly, I went in for those reasons. But it turns out no, there's no overarching social differences between people who play and people who don't. And part of that, I'm certain, is because games are incredibly social activities, and you're learning new social skills. You're learning how to communicate with less nonverbal cues. You're learning how to do things like multi-threading, which is hold multiple conversations on completely different topics at the same time. So, it's just a different perspective, I think, that's needed to understand the social nature of these spaces.
Let's turn that around a little bit. When these people are coming up with the games and producing the games, there is an awful lot of emphasis put on Warcraft, the shooter games, that sort of thing. Why? I mean, why, when you're putting out the games, you said and you're right, there's Animal Crossing and there's some games that are meant for younger kids and ways for them to interact. But a lot of them are shooter games, war games, that sort of thing. Why go with that angle if you're creating a game for the mass public?
I mean, I don't make games, so I can't presume to know their motivations. I can say that historical themes are always popular. People want to feel like they're reliving history, and, games like Civilization, which isn't necessarily a war-based, but games like that also kind of have that perspective. But I will say that the ESRB, which does the ratings in the U.S. about age rating and appropriateness for games. So there's E for everyone, there's M for mature. The shooter games are almost nearly always M for mature, which is 17 and up. It's actually, the M for mature is the smallest category of games. E for everyone is actually the largest rating, the most titles. So there are more of those Minecraft and Animal Crossing and Overcooked and those kinds of games than actually the shooter games, even though they tend to get the most press and the most attention. So I think we have this perception that it's disproportionate.
Rachel, as an adult doing Warcraft, what got you into that game?
World of Warcraft?
I want to talk about you. What
I love this.
you?
We're going to send this to my brother. My brother is an older brother. I was always Luigi. He was always Mario. It's fine. But he would not stop nagging me. And I kept saying, I don't have time to play an MMO because MMOs require like daily interactions. He wore me down. And then I joined and then I fell in love. And you know what I fell in love with? I fell in love with the people because the game at that point was already 5 years old. It wasn't like particularly technologically advanced. Like the graphics weren't cutting edge. Like there wasn't anything like particularly that special in terms of online game categories, but I fell in love with the people that I played with, and I played for years, and I absolutely loved it. It was hard I stopped when I did my PhD because then I really had no time. But it was hard to leave the people way more than to leave the game.
So the people are the characters as elaborated within the game.
The people as the real humans that were playing the other people who populate the space.
I see.
Yes, because World of Warcraft, you do adventures with real other people, like between 5 and 40 people for each of these different little adventures. So you get to know them and they live in all kinds of the world and you learn about their life and their spouses and their kids and their likes and their dislikes. And it just becomes really just like a school friendship group.
And I would suppose the choices they make in the games tell you a little bit about them.
It tells you who you want to be friends with.
Yeah.
There's a thing about friendships that form in games. It kind of goes back to being a pen pal. So friendships that form in games are different than friendships that form on other spaces on the internet. And they're called what we refer to as emotionally jump-started. Because you learn if you can trust someone from the very beginning before you know anything about them. So if Dawn and I are playing a game and there's like lava on the ground and Dawn is standing in it dying, I don't like Don. I'm like, Don, move out of the lava. Like, it's not that hard. Don't you see it? But if he moves out and we're successful, I don't know anything about him, but I like him. I immediately like him. Let's go do something else together. Let me get to know you. Let me, whatever. So these friendships form very quickly and become very close in a short amount of time, which is unlike what you see in other spaces on the internet. So the friendships are really sticky. They last when you're doing these things together.
What John was talking about earlier, all kids, when they hit their teen years, get moody and a little closed in. They're trying to find out who they are and all that other psychological stuff, which I probably shouldn't be dismissing as easily as I am. But when you see somebody who comes home from school and runs immediately to their room and locks the door or shuts the door and wants to play video games, that's not necessarily a bad sign. That would, to a parent who doesn't know anything about video games, that is a very antisocial and possibly worrying thing for them to deal with. But in fact, when they go in there, they're plunging into their world. And it's a lot like hanging around the mall used to be back in the 80s.
Yeah.
That was the other place we drove our kids before the video games started. Drop them off at the mall.
The thing about games and that exact scenario is if you are worried about your child, have a talk with them about what function are the games serving is always the question I'm asking. Is it I'm running home to play because I'm really close to getting this achievement and I'm dying to get it. I've been working so hard for months and I only have an hour before basketball practice. Is that it? Is it, I have these group of friends because I am somebody from a small town in Texas who knows no one else who likes the thing that I do. And I have all these friends on the game who are the same age as me, who likes the things that I do. So I really like hanging out with these people. What is the function? What are they doing? It's not, I guarantee you, 99% sure it is not an antisocial desire to go and close the door and do that.
We'll return to the musical Innertube in just a moment, but first, this soothing musical interlude.
Dr. Rachel Kowert graduated from the University of Texas at Dallas in May 2005 with a BA in psychology. After getting an MA in counseling psychology from Santa Clara University in 2006, she received her PhD at the University of York in York, England.
Rachel is the research director for Take This, a mental health nonprofit organization that serves the gaming industry and gaming communities. Its primary mission is to destigmatize mental health challenges and provide mental health information and support. She is also a science content creator on YouTube on a program called Psychgeist, where she regularly posts content about the science of digital games.
Find out more about Rachel by checking out her website at rkowert, that's RKOWERT.com.
And now, back to the musical Innertube, already in progress.
I used to think I didn't play video games, but then my wife said, John, you've been playing Duolingo for 8 years.
That is a game.
That is a game. And you can actually, you can meet people and have communities, and it's all built around, yes, it's built around learning languages, which many people would scream and run away from. But those of us who really love it, really love Duolingo. And I suddenly realized, oy vey, I'm a gamer. You know, that's a game, and it's very social.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I love about Duolingo is the way that it encourages you. You know, like if you haven't played for a couple of days, you see the owl and he looks a little bit disappointed. When are we going to see you again? Aren't you coming back to play? Or if you're close to like some kind of breakthrough, the owl will go, hey, are you coming back to do that thing? You know, so there's this sense of enthusiasm for you, you know?
I'm not necessarily mad that my kids decided to start going in their room to play the game, because when our game console was in the living room attached to the main television and they were playing Ghostbusters, that damn music played over and over and over again. And my wife and I were in the kitchen going, we're going to eventually kill someone. I mean, this was our reaction to it. So maybe the gamers themselves are good, but the people who are listening to the music over and over are the ones that are driven to madness. I'm not sure about that. Rachel, you were talking about how you got involved in games. How did that get married with your psychological studies and how you decided to go into counseling?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be a therapist for a really long time. That was always my goal when I was an undergrad. Like, okay, I'm going to go to graduate school and become a therapist. And then the first day of my master's program, I realized I so don't want to be a therapist. I was just like, oh, this is what it's like. It just great, wonderful profession, but I just knew it wasn't for me. But I was like, okay, I'll do my master's program because it's going to teach me a lot. I'm going to learn a lot, and then I'll see where I go from there. And then when I was doing my internship and doing the therapy, and I saw people were concerned about games, and then I saw there was no research on games at the time, that's when I pivoted and I said, okay, this is the path for me. I'm going to go do a research-based PhD. And actually what I looked at is the question about the social impact. Is playing online games impacting our ability to socialize in non-online contexts in relation to an atrophy of social skills, which is really the crux of the concern that the parents had, is like, they're going to lose all ability to communicate in the world. And I was like, pretty sure they're still interacting with people in other places, but okay. Let's go find out if that's true.
And you're on YouTube. And you're working with a group, Take This?
Yeah, Take This. I'm the research director at Take This, which is the oldest mental health nonprofit to serve gaming communities in the gaming industry. So we consult with the industry about concerns about burnout or discrimination or kind of things unique to the gaming industry itself. And then we also provide resources and support for game players. So a lot of times, as John pointed out, games are seen as the source of the problem, whereas a lot of times games could actually be something that's helping buffering the problem, whatever it might be. So we try to provide resources that are culturally competent and relevant to understanding what games are and what they aren't.
Do you see success in making concerned parents less concerned and helping them figure out that maybe this gaming that their kids are doing isn't all bad?
I hope so. I'm always disheartened by the continued headlines that seem to be, clickable, which is games are ruining my life or games are the source of this violent act. And I feel like it's always an uphill struggle to try and combat journalism in that way, because it just makes a really delicious headline to just take a really complicated thing and then say video games next to it and then be like, this is fine. But I think when I talk to parents, when I'm on podcasts like this, or when I'm actually talking to parents, I do think that the science speaks for itself. And I'll be 100% honest. When I went into my PhD program, I thought I was going to find negative relationships. There was so much concern about the social impact of games. I was genuinely concerned. Not that I thought there was anything wrong with me, but I was like, why are these people so concerned? There must be something here. And there's just not. That's why I have my YouTube channel, just to try and spread the word of like, we've been studying this for 40, 50 years and like, we know a lot now. So how do we get this information out so everyone can know a lot?
It's so funny because this is like the ultimate creation of popular culture. And yet also popular culture has found a way to sort of cast it in this negative light. It's so ironic. I'm sure you find it ironic every day.
Yeah. Well, Mortal Panics, this idea of like, oh, save the children, it's a cyclical. We've seen it throughout history, and video games are just the latest in the long line of it, right? And the thing about the panic around games is that it's lasted so long, and none of these panics tend to last so long. And I think it's just because VR isn't ubiquitous yet, because as soon as that's ubiquitous, I guarantee you they'll be like, oh, those old 2D between you and a screen games, no big deal. It's the VR that's the real problem.
Have you tried VR yet?
It makes me very motion sick.
I've heard that's a problem with some people.
Yeah, I did a cool demo of a new game a couple years ago, and it was beautiful. And I remember it was a shooter. You were shooting robots, and I remember looking around like, wow. And I'm like, oh, like where's my weapon? And they're like, look down. I'm like, oh wow, like this is so cool. And I was like, yeah, you got to get me out of here. I feel really gross, but this is beautiful.
You think that's where we're headed now? Because I know that when Apple came up with its latest, which is not VR, but it's enhanced reality, I guess, a lot of people were saying this is not going to go anywhere.
Well, yeah, the augmented reality goggles. I found those cool for like an ad, but I just can't imagine anyone's going to just wear those around their house.
Yeah.
I mean,
or walking down the street.
I mean, it's like Google Glasses. Google Glasses was cool too, but like that also didn't take off. So, I mean, they're trying some new cool augmented stuff, but I think that augmented reality, virtual reality, it's going to become more affordable. It's going to become more ubiquitous. It's inevitable that that's the way that we're going. I just think, people want to talk about the metaverse and what's the future like. And it's like, can we just talk about what we have right now? Because those conversations are still ongoing.
Yeah. And what about crazes like when everybody was chasing Pokemons down the street?
I know, Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go is great. I still play it. I love that game because it's augmented reality, right? So it overlays a virtual reality on top of the physical world. And it was really great because parents and kids were doing it together. And I would love to see more kind of novel innovations in games that can make those kinds of games that do bring parents and children together. And they were exercising and walking outside, which all parents love. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's the opposite of the, curl up in the basement and play a video game.
Right.
Scenario.
What research have you encountered comparing video games to other forms of entertainment? And I ask this as that rare person in the United States who likes to read a lot, and when you read books, what happens is you enter a different reality. It's all in your head. It's through the medium of language where a good writer will be able to pitch you into any time, any place with people that you find interesting. What have you found out about, video games versus music versus reading?
All forms of media have that element of transportation, right? Teleportation, music, people talk about that as music as well. You close your eyes and you get transported to another spot. What you're talking about is the term is flow. And flow is when you lose kind of sense of space and time and you're just like fully immersed and fully involved in the experience that's happening. And all media has the capability of doing that. Games, however, because they are interactive and they respond to what you are doing, they're particularly good at inducing flow that happens in between the rate of challenge as the challenge increases and as the player's skill kind of corresponds with the challenge. So you may find like maybe your kid, I played a lot of Sims when I was younger. And when I would play the Sims, I would get so into it that I would look up and 6 hours went by and it felt like 5 minutes. that's the perfect example of flow. Like you lose all sense of awareness of where you are. So all media can do it, but games are particularly good at kind of inducing that state in players.
And you're involved with a project with Homeland Security now, and that's probably leaning toward the destructive power of video games. Is that right?
Yeah. I spent the first, 13 years of my career really fighting against this moral panic and this stereotype, which I think is still very important, that games can be overwhelmingly good. But in 2020, I read a report from the Anti-Defamation League that said 1 in 4 game players are exposed to white supremacist ideology while they're playing online games. And it just seemed so high of a number to me. I almost found it to be unbelievable. And I contacted the person who wrote the report, and he was like, "No, Rachel, that's the number, 1 in 4. And I was like, okay, that seems high. What can we do about it? So now I'm working on a 2-year project funded by the Department of Homeland Security in collaboration with the Middlebury Institute for Counterterrorism and also this tech company called Logically AI. And what we're doing is we're looking at the prevalence of extreme ideologies in games, and we're also looking at the standards and practices in the industry of how to combat it. With the idea being that we can create some kind of toolkit that's really available to everyone that has kind of best practices and standards and tools, and like how can we collectively as an industry combat the way that these games are being leveraged for nefarious purposes. Yeah.
So you had mentioned best practices and that they don't, somebody wants to have them and many people would like to see them in the gaming industry. And it's the same conversation that people are having about AI, isn't it? That,
yes.
And AI, I think with AI, the product is being developed way ahead of these early questions, that it's going full steam ahead, and people want to have this conversation first.
Yeah, that seems logical.
Yes, right, exactly right. And here we've had, it's interesting that video games will soon be 50 years old, and really we haven't had the conversation.
No. And the thing about the industry, too, is that everything is siloed. Like what one game company has is their tools and ideas. It's completely separate from what another game has. So that's what we're trying to do with this work, is like talk to the big AAA companies, talk to the little indies who have next to no resources to do anything about this, and pull all that information together and just hand it out so everyone can be on the same page, and then they can do with that as they will, I suppose.
Okay, so that must be a little comforting to parents at some point.
I hope. I'm trying.
Well, Dr. Rachel Kowert, thanks very much for being on the show. You are neck deep in this stuff, but it looks like you're doing some good. And if anybody wants to contact you and talk more about this, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me and ways to contact me on my website, which is rkowert.com.
Okay, terrific.
Thank you for coming on. That was a really quick half hour.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Our lovely little podcast is available everywhere good podcasts are found. Listen on your favorite platform, and if you like what you hear, please give us a good rating.
And spread the word. Tell your friends about the Innertube and let them know they can subscribe to the podcast on our website, musicalinnertube.com.
There you can listen to all of our podcasts, see pictures and biographies of our guests, and contact us. You can even click on the microphone button in the lower right corner to leave us a voicemail.
And don't forget to leave your email address on our Talk to the Tube page so we can stay in touch.
And you can email us directly at musicalinnertube@gmail.com.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.